Our next speaker, Ayush Jaiswal, is the founder and CEO of Pesto Tech that helps top-tier companies hire top-grade remote engineers from India. Pesto Tech is a technology education company that trains, upskills, and enables India's top software engineering talent for fast-paced growth and break into the international tech careers via full-time remote jobs. Pesto is on a mission to give everyone equal access to opportunity regardless of their background. Today, it is focusing on upskilling India's 5 million software engineers and pairing them with the world's top tech companies. Ayush, the stage is yours.
Thanks for the intro, Marta. I think that I felt good about myself for a little bit there. That we saw the future ahead of time, but yeah, I would love to share some thoughts on how the world has changed, and also give perspective around how remote work as an industry evolved, because a lot of people think that remote work is fairly new, but the fact is that remote work has actually been around for the last 10 years or so, right? And I believe that the way it has evolved, it's quite beautiful, right? So I think during the talk, I'll talk about sort of a few focus points, right? That how remote work is changing, how remote jobs are changing, and how remote education is evolving, right? So I think I'll keep these three broad points, which I'll hit back all the time, and also share some perspective. So to start with, I think I'll refer to the time when I got excited about remote work, right? Like I remember in 2017 when I visited US, I was trying to figure out something to do. I was in the early stages of my career, and I came across a company called GitLab, a company which had no offices. So now it's the norm. I don't think anyone has offices today, but at that time it was crazy. I realized that GitLab, Zapier, and a bunch of other startups were doing some phenomenal job with respect to building their team fully remote with people all across the world. And that really fascinated me, right? So I think in the pre-pandemic world, before coronavirus really gave us a hard time, we were looking at remote work trend really picking up quickly, right? And we were estimating that towards the end of 2020 and the first couple of quarters of 2021, more and more small to mid-size startups will start being the early adopters, right? And we were guessing that the top talent would want to go remote. So we were thinking that the whole transition from a normal world to a remote universe will look like something, which will have a transition period of about 3 to 4 years, right? And I think what the pandemic did to that is that it just shrinked that 3 to 5 years timeline to 3 to 5 months, and everybody had to adjust and change their behaviors in a matter of months, right? So I think that happened, and ever since the pandemic, we don't feel that work will be the same ever again. We feel the world is not changing. The world has already changed, and there is no going back. And the reason I say this is because I personally started being fascinated about remote work because I believe that remote work just had way too many advantages, and the only barrier was stereotypes. People thinking that, that there's a usual way of doing work, like usual way people go to offices, work from 9 to 5, so on and so forth. Breaking those stereotypes was the hardest thing which we faced in our Pesto's journey in the first couple of years, right? But once that happened, I run a newsletter and I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs on a weekly basis. I have barely had anyone who came to me and said that the productivity of their team has gone down because of working from home, right? And I'm of course specifically talking about people in tech, people who can do their jobs, while being at home, and not, which jobs which requires physical presence. So we feel that now that the stereotypes were forcefully, in a brute force manner broken, and people tried a bunch of things and that worked, I feel as we get back to the world, and as the pandemic situation sort of goes away with time, we feel that the companies are going to stick to working remote. And I think as that happens, there is a fundamental thing which we are also chasing, is that there is disparity of opportunities across the world, right? Like we always say that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. There is such scarcity of developers in US, and there is abundance of developers in India and Europe. Earlier, these people had to migrate to those places, right? All of us had to move to cities in search of opportunities. That kept us away from our families. That disturbed our work-life balance. That made us travel a couple of hours in traffic every day. That really degraded the quality of life over time. And I feel that people are realizing that once people go remote, all of those advantages can be taken care of, and there are just too many good things when it comes to working remotely, for the world to get back to the old ways. So I think that is something which excites us the most, and that is something which we have a lot of clarity on, and we are moving towards that direction where we address those challenges. The second thing which I would love to talk about is how are people adopting to this change, right? Now, we know that this is something which is the future, and it cannot be really, there are very few people who would bet against it. But as we are moving remote, now we have to see how we are going to adopt, how we are going to solve the challenges which comes to remote work, right? Aspects like there are certain social challenges when you're in a company and you're visiting, the conversations you have over lunch with people you don't directly work with, that really makes the whole experience of working beautiful, right? So I'll touch upon a couple of points. First is remote collaboration. And the second one I'll talk about is how do you actually build a culture in a remote environment, right? How do you really make people build meaningful relationships while working remotely, right? So first of all, I think I'll talk about collaboration, right? I think when it comes to collaboration, remote work is something which has only become possible or has become sustainable in last few years. And what has changed is technology. Earlier, 5 years ago, we did not have technology to support the remote nature of work. But we had certain early adopters, certain companies like Doist, like Basecamp, Loom. One of the tools which I'm using, which is great, right? The pandemic happened and Zoom backgrounds became a thing, right? We are using a Zoom background and flashing our logos. And this company basically said that we can now make use of those backgrounds and actually make the meeting more productive, right? So I can do all sorts of things to communicate with my background. I can, shrink up. I can come back, become bigger when I don't want people to look at my background. I can decrease my opacity when I want to flash your logo. I can become a Yoda, and move around with it. So I think these are all fun tools. These are all innovations which has happened in just last, few months. And I feel that there is so much more innovation which is going to happen around collaboration, which is going to solve the communication aspect of remote working, which impacts your productivity, right? So I think the productivity part is something which we are very confident that it has been taken care of. And there are very few people who will doubt that, that can be a challenge. The second aspect, which is how do you build that culture in the company, right? Now that is super interesting for us as well. At Pesto, we moved remote last year. We always have had a few people who have been working remote with us since the inception, we have always realized that there are things in a remote environment which you have to do consciously, which earlier happened subconsciously, right? If you went to your office, you would talk to your colleague almost, without realizing, like while having your lunch or while, sort of drinking water at the water cooler, right? Just saying simple things like, hey, how are you doing? How's your vacation, right? Things like that, catching up with them, getting to know about their lives, going out for dinner and things like that happen. But now, when you send somebody a Slack message that, hey, I would love to do a coffee meeting with you, or catch up for a game, right? It sounds weird, right? Because you need to schedule it. So we realized that the only difference when it comes to a remote environment and a non-remote environment with respect to building culture was that we had to do things consciously rather than relying on relationships getting built by people being in the same room, right? So the definition of same room has changed, right? Some of the things which we do at Pesto is that we hold no agenda meetings, right? We catch up once a month, every Friday, in which we are going to play poker, right? All of us, or play some card game, or play some, board games, right? And everybody's, people are having beer, coffee, whatever, and just trying to spend some time with each other, right? So I think doing things like those really helped us to get people together and bring that feeling of togetherness, right? And that has really helped us build that culture, and in the social aspect, I would say, of the company, which has really made work fun for us. Now, the second point which I would also want to mention here is that right now, what we are doing, we are comparing that with remote work. I would like to believe that this is not what remote work looks like. We have been working remote before the pandemic, and I'm very, very certain that there is one way of work, which is the old way of work. Then there is remote work, in which you work remotely from a different office or a coffee shop, wherever you want, but you work not in the same office, right? You can work at a co-working space, so on and so forth, right? All employees in different co-working spaces. The third way of work is work from home. You have a home office. You try to build discipline in the house, in which you teach yourself how you're going to differentiate between your work-life balance and manage that, right? That is the third way of working. That is work from home. The fourth way of working, which people often don't talk about, is work from pandemic. So what we are doing right now is not remote work. It's not work from home. It's actually work from pandemic. And the reason I say this is because remote work was pretty awesome, right? Like you would have your setup, you could order books, you could do things, you could go out to play, you could go out for partying, you could meet your friends, so on and so forth. You could also, while working remotely, host offsites in which you bring people together. Like before the pandemic happened, we actually planned to do offsites almost every quarter, in which we would bring all our employees together in one place and brainstorm and have fun, right? But none of that we can do today. So I think people really need to understand that what we are doing today has a lot of positives, but it also has a lot of negatives. But those negatives are not necessarily targeted at remote work. They are also related to this work from pandemic situation, which will go away with time, right? So I think it's pretty fascinating. I'm super curious about how the world will adopt it, but the trend which I'm seeing is that more and more companies are now open to working remote, and the access to talent which they get while doing that is pretty phenomenal. And that brings me to the next agenda items, which is remote jobs, right? Like how is the jobs market going to evolve? How are people going to take it? How's the market going to evolve, so on and so forth, right? And I think a couple of really good things I would talk about when it comes to remote jobs is that I feel as jobs go remote, globalization of opportunities is going to happen. And those opportunities will become a lot more democratic in nature. Earlier, people in Europe did not have access to opportunities which are in Latin America, let's say, right? Or North America. But now they do. Now people in Europe can work with, companies in Asia, right? That's great. And that is great for the company because they now have the world's talent at their disposal, right? And they can pick and choose, and they can sort of hire them and work accordingly. However, it has its own challenges, right? Challenges like your ability to stand out. Earlier, if a company posted a job post in Nevada, right, then people in Nevada would apply there, right? If you post a job in Los Angeles, people in Los Angeles would apply with the matching profiles. But today, if you post a job, probably people all across the world are going to apply, and filtering those applications is going to become very costly for companies. Interviewing is going to be a big burden which will come up as the number of applications goes up. So that's the negative side of things, right? For people who are looking for jobs, it's very, very important for them to find a way to differentiate themselves. We feel that the whole recruitment industry is going to have to change and evolve. We had seen previously that recruitment industries, KPIs used to be around how many profiles, matching profiles you send, which means filling up the top of the funnel more, right? But now it's the whole game is going to reverse. Now people might need the recruitment agencies to not send more profiles, but to filter out the profiles which they have already received, because the problem is different now. The problem is not the lack of profiles. The problem is interviewing, right? And I feel that there are a lot of companies which will show up in that market, that gap, that niche which is there right now will become much larger as the market expands, as the remote work industry expands, right? And I think that is going to fundamentally cause a couple of really, really big changes with respect to the whole industry, right? And I think that is something which we are sort of looking forward to as well. So that is how I believe the jobs market is going to evolve. It's going to become just a hell lot more competitive. And at the same time, people will get access to opportunities which they did not have before. So I think I'm really curious to see how that goes up. I know we are short on time. I'm just going to do a quick one on remote education before I open it up for questions. I thought there is some Q&A sort of session as well, which I would love to address. The last point, which is around remote education, right? I think Pesto was a company which was earlier doing education in a non-remote format. We used to get our students in our campus and we used to train them in person, right? Our evolution also happened late last year, right? I think we launched our new program in January or February, since when we went fully remote with respect to education, right? Now, we realized that the signals of this we had already seen over the last 5 years, right? We had seen rise of some great companies, the likes of Coursera, Udemy, so on and so forth, and multiple other companies in different skill sectors, which came up with the advantage of spreading that education, via some experts. We had seen Masterclass and a bunch of other companies who did a great job with that. We feel that people are now being able to measure the progress. I think measuring the progress is something which fundamentally, I believe, is changing the game. Earlier, I'll give you, an example that and I'll specifically talk about remote education, right? Sorry, tech education and nothing else, because that's my expertise. I believe that tech education in general is quite new. It's only 20 years old. And as tech education came in, we tried to fit it into an older concept of education, which we knew, which is 400 years old. The whole concept of going to a building, studying for 4 years or 5 years, X amount of time, and thinking that the knowledge which you accumulate in that amount of time period will be relevant throughout your life. We feel that that whole concept is a little broken when it comes to tech, for one simple reason, that tech changes almost every couple of years. Whatever you learn today will not be relevant 5 years from now. And for that one reason, the older concept doesn't work. And if we think about it, degrees were just a way to validate that you have X amount of skill sets, right? Because internet came in last 20, 25 years, right? Before that, there was no way for anyone to validate what are the things which you know. So that's why people use degrees, right? In last decade or so, we have seen the transition happening from degrees to some other ways in which you can measure the skill set. For a designer, your work can easily be seen on Instagram, on Flickr, Dribbble, or multiple other platforms, which people can, have a look at and judge your skill set. For a programmer, I would love to look at the code which you have written instead of the college where you studied from, right? And I think the ability to measure those skill sets is exponentially increasing in different fields when it comes to tech. And I think for that one simple reason, over the next 2 to 5 years, we are going to see a massive transition happening in mindset when companies are going to transition from hiring people from the traditional, education background, so on and so forth, to finding more and better ways in which they can exactly measure the skill sets of these people who are coming in. And as that happens, I believe the focus on continuous education is going to be the key. A lot of people are going to start focusing on continuous education and build that into their habit. And education will no longer be a limited time period thing. It'll more be like, a part of your lifestyle. So I think people will have to continuously learn in order to stay relevant in the market. And again, as I said, this is very specific to tech because my domain knowledge is limited. But this is what we have seen that is going to happen. And for this one simple reason, fundamentally, if you have to learn constantly, being in any physical location constantly is just not a possibility. So by design, remote education has to be adopted by people over the next few years as they fight to stay relevant in the market.
I've already asked this question to another speaker, but I will also ask you a very general and a very philosophical question that you kind of may have addressed already in your presentation, but kind of to summarize, what do you think will be the future of work? And not only technology work, developer work, but work in general. How will we be defining work in the next years, decades?
I think most of the skill sets or job positions which we see today will probably be irrelevant in next few decades, right? And because you mentioned decades, I believe that slowly automation is going to take over majority of the jobs, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's just that we as human beings have to do a certain amount of work to take care of our necessities. And if that gets automated, you just have better quality of life, right? You will need a new system. But I feel that the skill sets which we see, which has relevance today, will not have relevance, necessarily a few years from now as well, right? So that is with respect to skill sets. The other thing, which is quite important, is that future of work does not belong to people coming together, like in an office environment, to sort of feel that they belong to the same company, right? I'm just trying to figure out how do I put it. So companies are not going to pull people together to the same building to give them that sense of belongingness. Instead of companies doing that, that sense of belongingness has to be somewhere, right? I believe communities is something which will do that instead, right? Like, so I think, I feel that communities is going to be the next real estate. And that is going to be extremely valuable as we move along. So yeah, just sharing some random thoughts there.
Well, not so random, I think, because it's literally something that I think as well, that the communities are the future, and that communities will be defining the way we work, the way we function. So yeah, I guess great minds think alike. I do have a bit of a personal question for you, in the sense that you mentioned about, well, we were talking about remote work, obviously, but what prepares for remote work is remote education, one would think. And do you have experience in that? Like, what did you do to be prepared for what you're doing right now? And what lessons can you advise for others?
Gotcha. I think as we are all going through this situation, there is no sort of a go-to secret which is going to solve everybody's problems, because I feel different companies are different. Like, a culture of a company is the people in it, right? That's what I believe, that people form the culture, and you try to bring people with similar mindsets together and try to support them. I feel that similarly, just like culture was in a sort of non-remote environment, I believe the same is going to happen when it comes to remote work. We are going to see a lot of companies come up with different solutions, but we will have a very simple common stack to solve all the common problems which we all face. For example, collaboration across different time zones, right? Now, things like that are going to be solved, right? I would say that things like that are already solved. I think what we have seen is that asynchronous communication has been extremely productive for different companies, right? Where people can work at their own pace, and they can be productive while doing that. And different people from different parts of the world sort of can hop along. And if we think about it in retrospect, we will realize that India, for example, is the outsourcing hub of the world, and only the top 4 consulting companies employ more than 1 million people. All of those millions of people have been working remote for the last 4 to 5 decades. And nobody noticed it earlier because it wasn't as fancy, right? Now, they've been working from offices in India, I get that. But in a sense that they've been working remote while they collaborate with companies in US. So I think some of the things which are the most common things which I would highly recommend people solving for is that over communication has to be practiced across different teams. Without that, remote work is just impossible. Taking conscious efforts to build the relationships within the company, and organizing things which brings the social aspects of the team in the game is extremely important. And it could be as simple as using Snapchat filters or to just have fun and sort of like do silly things on Zoom call. but I think that social aspect is extremely important because working at a company should feel like you're working towards a mission together with others, right? So I think that is the second most important thing. And the third most important thing I feel is documentation, right? If you document everything really well, that really decreases the work for your teammates and helps them be on the same page, right? I feel if we just practice these three things right, and of course you need to have your culture code straight in which you practice the usual trying to optimize for high performance and accountability and things like that. I think these three things are the biggest ones for me when it comes to moving towards a remote environment.
Wow, that's like exactly the things that we needed to hear, I guess. And that kind of covers my one of the questions that I also had was about the 3 tips that you would give to employers for remote work. But maybe there's something you want to add, a tip or two for employers, for companies, if they want to have a successful remote team.
Oh, 100%. I think apart from these 3 things, I would say that it's extremely important to protect the togetherness, especially during pandemic for all employers, because it's very easy for employees to get isolated and start feeling lonely. We have seen that pattern in the past, and that was one of the biggest challenges with remote work, that happened. So I think mental health is something which we sort of expect will be a challenge with respect to remote work, and employers should do something about it. Just taking small steps to checking in on them, or we are introducing something called a recharge holidays at Pesto. We're about to announce it to our team as well, in which we're just asking people to take a few days off every month to sort of relax, because we realize that in a remote environment, because everything is scheduled, you actually end up working a lot, and the tendency to burn yourself out for especially people who are hardworking folks is quite high. So I think mental health and taking care of these aspects is extremely important for employers. They'll have to make conscious efforts because these problems won't be visible to them, right?
I totally agree. I have just one last question to ask you, and that is, I know I've seen before we started this recording that you're very savvy with various online tools, and at the same time, Korean market, although very digital and you would say tech savvy, is not very onto remote work yet. So what are the 3 tools that you would recommend to Korean employers and employees to get accustomed to remote work and jump on the bandwagon and just enjoy the show?
Oh my God, it's very hard for me to come down to 3 actually. But
I will make it slightly easier. That a lot of English is not the most comfortable language in Korea, so something that can address that as well, maybe.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I actually haven't come across a lot of language translation products. I actually browse products on Product Hunt a lot, and
Yeah.
I think that gives me a lot of sort of exposure to what's happening new in tech. But I think I'll quickly mention a few tools which are quite phenomenal when it comes to remote work in general. I feel for documentation, having a wiki for every company whenever you work remote is extremely important. And for documentation, Notion.so has become one of the most popular tools in recent times, and we use it for our own internal wiki as well, and that is pretty phenomenal for us. The second one which I would recommend is a collaboration tool in which people can come together and sort of communicate or over communicate rather in a much more effective way, right? Slack or Microsoft Teams are a great example of that. We've seen the popularity of Microsoft Teams in recent times, but we have been using Slack for a while now, and that has really added a lot of value for being remote. The third tool I would recommend is actually one of my favorite ones. There is a tool. So the whole feeling of people being together or people being with you while you work is extremely important. And I realized that it is actually not, the physical presence which gives you that feeling. Even when people are there on my screen, I feel the same, that they're here. I can, just hit a button and talk to them without having to request them for a call or without having to, schedule it or things like that. And the tool which I'm talking about, a couple of tools who solve the same problem. One is called Remotion, and the other one is called Tandem, Tandem, right? Both of these tools are pretty phenomenal. Whatever number of people you have in your office, it creates different rooms in which you can jump in and out of, pretty quickly. And you can hit people up. There's a small circle which starts a call quickly on the spot, and you feel like you are with them. And I feel that psychologically added a lot of value for us. I see Anurag recommended one tool as well, Flitto. I'm unaware of what it exactly does, but I think it must be something related to collaboration over different languages.
I would like to thank our speakers for sharing very interesting and profound insights and their experiences connected to remote technology and digitalization. I do hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please stay tuned for next month's webinar where we will be talking about AI technology and how it's been changing Korea's ecosystem. In the meantime, please stay safe and sound. Thank you and see you soon.